We've got, great online resources for people, fantastic webinars people can tap into. There's online yoga, there's all of those lovely things that you can do, but the psychological safety is really the most important bit, I think, of all of that. People really do need to be able to, struggle safely. And if you don't have that in place, then people can't really thrive as well. So that piece about being able to bring your whole self to work and everything about it, good, bad and ugly, is really important.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium show. I'm delighted to be here, delighted you're here, and of course delighted to welcome my guest today, who is Kate Colley. Kate is the head of people and culture at Austraila Post corporate division. And thank you so much, Kate, for spending some time, because I know you're super busy, as are all of my guests, it seems. I think we're getting busier and busier. But where are you today? Where are you speaking to us from today?
I'm speaking to you from downtown North Fitzroy in Melbourne, which is a nice part of town, and starting to look a bit festive out there, Lawrence, as we head into Christmas.
I know it is. It still feels, I don't know, because I've still got the Northern Hemisphere kind of mindset around Christmas being cold. So Christmas in summer is still new for me. But listen, it's wonderful to have you on the show. And for people who aren't familiar with you and your work, I mean, clearly you have a very big role, and I know you spent a lot of years in NAB. And I think what's really interesting is how you've seen the evolution and the change of the HR function over those years. But I'd love you to introduce yourself to our audience for people who aren't familiar with your work.
For sure. Thanks so much, Lawrence. So I've had the pleasure of working in HR for most of my career, and most of that's been in banking and finance. So as you mentioned at NAB, I've worked in Australia and also over in Asia, which was fantastic. And I've really loved most of my career spending time with leaders and in organisations working on their people and culture strategy. A firm believer that you don't get anything done except through people, and so that focusing on the people is, absolutely paramount. And I've been so lucky to have worked with some brilliant leaders over the years who get that, and who really understand it's really important to put the right environment and culture in place to help people thrive, and also to help them struggle safely. So in my most recent gig back at NAB before joining Austraila Post, I was the executive for health, safety, wellbeing for a couple of years, and certainly through the start of the pandemic and as we sort of all navigated COVID, and never before has it been more important to focus on that well-being of people and really ensuring we're creating an environment where people can be well, or if they're not, to struggle safely. Yeah.
Did you find, so maybe that's a good place to start, like in your career, I'm very curious and interested to understand, because you've been in HR and your philosophy is very aligned with my own philosophy around the importance of people to get anything done, because there's always a person involved in at some point in the process. But in the past, and I'm talking from my own experience here, you find there were always a number of people who got that and really understood it. And I'm sure these are people that you alluded to. But there were many people who didn't necessarily understand it, or understood it at an intellectual or conceptual level, but didn't kind of understand it when it came to the actual behavior and action. Have you found that COVID or the pandemic or the experience of disruption and change, has that really changed people? So people, you're finding that more leaders, more managers really get it and are therefore adapting their behavior based on the current context. I'm really curious your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if I look back over the last 20 years, we've come a long way when we think about leadership and the role of a leader. When I first started working, that concept of bringing your whole self to work didn't really exist, and and people often felt they had to have a front for work. They were one person at work and one person at home. It was very difficult for women to navigate family and work, difficult for blokes too, of course, but really challenging, I think, for women. And the world has shifted a lot. And the pandemic, I actually think, has been, albeit not a positive experience for anyone, but has had some incredible positives come out of it. And I think we've been able to shift culture 10 years into, because people have had to. And so if you think about all the things we've been trying to do in the people and culture space around inclusion over the last year, so many years, all of a sudden, people had to work flexibly. People leaders had to support it and find ways. So, where it used to be why, it's kind of why not? Why not? You certainly have proven that people can really be flexible and adaptable, and deliver, continue to deliver great performance. And I think from a leadership perspective, where we may have had people who doubted that in the past, maybe their experience, they hadn't had some great experiences in that, they didn't know how to lead people in that environment. I think people have really learnt how to do that. And where we see, businesses really performing and doing well, it's because the leaders have thought very, very deeply, how do I lead in this new environment? How do I create an inclusive culture? How do I communicate more, even though I can't see the person face to face, although Zoom and all of those lovely things help that, but can't physically be in the same space as that person. I can still intuitively understand how they're feeling. I can ask better questions. I can create an environment where the team supports each other. And I think it's been absolutely marvelous, really, the shift. Now, of course, there's always leaders who still don't get it, but I think mostly people have really come on a big journey. And the next evolution, of course, hoping, of course, that at some point COVID sort of goes into the background, really embracing what we've learned, and putting in place hybrid working to create, better cultures for people, better environment. I'm not sure about you, but before COVID, I struggled to get home and have dinner with my family. Now, 2 years actually really doing, there's no way I'm giving that up,
It's so interesting.
It's really important to me now, and I kind of think, oh my goodness, there's stuff I've really missed because of the way we were working, which really wasn't good for any of us.
Yeah. It's so true. It wasn't balanced, was it? When you look at it now, I mean, a lot of what's happening now is still not balanced, but at the same time, what I hear you say is it required a burning platform to really change, because it is the role of the leader. We talk a lot, through our conferences, through all of our touch points, we talk a lot about the role of the leader as a touch point, because it impacts well-being. So if leaders are role modeling behaviors, then of course that may not be their intention, but people will copy, what they're actually doing. And it's interesting hearing your perspective on how that role of the leader has changed. And it reminds me, because in many ways, it's a real mindset shift, because if you were trained as a leader in the 90s, of course, all of that content or that training would have been very different. I would have gone on leadership training in the kind of early 2000s, and I don't remember very much that covered emotional intelligence. It didn't, it was completely absent. I learned a lot about marketing, sales, some of these kind of hard business functions, but what we, would call soft skills, that was always absent. Whereas now, I think the value of those soft skills has really shifted.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, there's, you'd be familiar with the work of Michelle McQuaid, and I love sort of some of the models that she talks about, and that kind of piece around leadership through a care model. And, that's the elements of compassion and appreciation and responsibility, but the really important bit in that as well, the fourth one, around EQ. And it's interesting, you know, when I sort of look at the way I was leading quite a big team through COVID, and you know, sort of stepped in at the point of March and everybody going home, you know, and the team, you know, had a really great rhythm. They were a fantastic team, had a great rhythm in place about meeting and supporting each other. And through COVID, though, we really dialed it all up, you know. So we were meeting as a team every morning as a check-in, not for any purpose other than how is everybody? Does anybody need support? You know, does anybody have anything difficult today that they'd like to share that they, you know, we can jump in and help each other with? And you sort of think about, wasn't it funny? Why did it take a crisis for us to put in place things like that? You know, before that, you know, leaders, of course, would check in with people, but, you know, in a fortnightly connect with someone, you know, you may not get what you know, so that kind of more human interaction being really important. And I'm a firm believer that you can grow leadership capability and you can build people's EQ. And a lot of it comes back to how do you give people real insight to themselves. And you know, back when I was up in Asia, we ran a fantastic talent program with Lisa Stevenson, who's a fantastic coach and facilitator, a program called Thrive. And it was all about a longitudinal program, but it was all about giving the person really deep insight to themselves, because through that, we you know, really believed that they would come out the other end as somebody with higher EQ, you know, a better ability to be able to connect to other people, ask better questions, you know, have deeper insight into the other person, because actually they've got some lived experience in some of these areas, and it really worked. It's really
yeah.
worked.
Yeah. I'd love to understand that a little more. So who are the people that you would have gone on that program? Were they kind of leadership level people?
Yeah. So, well, this was interesting when we were up in, so I was working for NABS as the head of HR up in Asia, and we were in lots of different countries, lots of different cultures, and all of our, you know, most of our people in those locations were of course local, but we needed the teams very much to be working more collaboratively. You know, we needed to support clients from Australia or big multinationals in Asia to do work back in Australia. So we needed lots of collaboration across the teams. So we did grab, you know, we did some work to identify who were our kind of top talent, but it wasn't just leadership talent, it was specialist talent as well. And you know, and whacked them all together, because part of the piece was also trying to get people, well, you know, if they knew themselves better and they could meet this cohort of people that they needed to work with, but with different cultures, different backgrounds, you know, they didn't know much about, they didn't know, you know, and how do you build that trust? And a lot of it was about that. And, you know, we had a great cohort go through that. A lot of it was about one-on-one coaching with those individuals as well, once they'd identified the areas they wanted to work on. You know, I think all of that deep insight, and then, you know, ability to actually do something about it, you know, is really powerful. But it was a very successful program because we really were able to create a community and create a cohort of people who had been through an experience together. And you know, I think that's very powerful. And then you think about those leaders and how they can come out of that and actually create that similar sort of thing without the program with their team, you know, using what they've learned. But you're right. I mean, we didn't do that 20 years ago, and now we kind of know that there's real value in that.
There is. And I completely agree with your point about real, like, self-awareness, isn't it? You know, if you understand yourself, then you can play to your strengths and you can put yourself in environments. And I'm curious as to an organization like NAB or Australia Post, like how you would scale that, because it sounds very simple. And you know, in the past, I've had so many 360 feedback processes. And I guess, you know, if I'm honest, the very first time I had one of those, I was really nervous. I was like, you know, it was almost like I didn't want to know, you know, because we tend, I think as humans, we tend to think in a more negative. So we think, oh golly, everyone's going to be criticizing me or whatever. but over having had it many times, that has really helped me grow as a person. It's like, you know, the gift of feedback, if you like. How would you cope with scaling that? Because a lot of people will not have that awareness and will not have the, I guess, the opportunity to go on a program like you described, where it's a very, you know, controlled environment that will give them, you know, insights that and the support around what to do with it, you know.
What to do with it.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, we did scale it at NAB. So we had, you know, Thrive was something that we put across all of our business banking world. But, you know, it's a very important cohort to the organisation and an important cohort to invest in. Interestingly, at Australia Post at the moment, there's a big investment also in leadership. You know, I think boards and executive teams absolutely understand, again, that point. If you want to execute strategy, you know, you need your leaders to be capable in supporting the delivery of the strategy, but supporting their teams to deliver it, you know, and it's all through the people. You know, I think they get that. So we've got a big investment program at the moment in leadership at Australia Post, and all, you know, big cohort of leaders across the whole organisation. And, you know, it's 35,000 permanent employees, big cohort of leaders across the top of that. And that is starting, actually, the first component. People go through an assessment, and it's an assessment centre, actually. So not just sort of the 360 sort of tool, but something quite, you know, quite tangible. And they have a debrief post that, you know, with the assessor and psych assessor, to really help understand strengths and development areas. And I think focusing on strengths is also something I think we need to do a lot more of, rather than just the development areas. But that insight, I think, is really important, that the individuals then go into team cohorts and they get some formal learning, but they also have projects that they work on together and use the insights from their learning, the insights from the assessment, to actually support them through that project. And part of that is sort of that responsibility to deliver on, you know, you get the learning, but then you've got something you need to do. And a lot of the delivery elements are broader than your role. So, you know, how do you deliver across the enterprise? I think it is hard to scale those programs, you know, but you know, you need to involve the executive and the leadership group. It has to be their responsibility to make it successful.
Yes, it does.
And it, you know, it does start with the investment, and it's not just the dollars, the investment in time, of course, and opportunity to fail, and to fail safely, and to learn, and all of those things is really important.
You realize when you train, because it does start with leadership, with managers, because mentorship is so important, isn't it? And if you've got people, because we learn by observation, you know, we see behaviors and then we think, oh, that's interesting, because ultimately it may not even be a conscious process. Just kind of moving on from leadership, and just I'm really curious now at Australia Post. So you mentioned the 35,000 people, and you're responsible for the corporate. What does that mean? The corporate.
Yes, so the part of the business that I work with is, you know, technology area, finance teams, people and culture teams, strategy teams, procurement teams, all of the people who support the broader enterprise to deliver for customers. And so, you know, and very diverse group of people, and often, you know, often needing to make a lot of those decisions for the broader enterprise. And you hope, you know, through their people and culture, you know, we've got to make sure that they are, you know, we've got great talent in those spaces. You know, we want to make sure we attract and retain the very best people, because they might be building the tools for the front of the business, and, you know, really supporting those important frontline workers to deliver to our customers. And one of the beautiful things about Australia Post, and the reason I joined AP, is that it's just the scale of the joint is remarkable. You know, they deliver to every single community in Australia, and they'd be the only, you know, kind of business that has that sort of footprint, and it's also a very community-based business. So, you know, it's there to deliver a service, and you know, that's quite a lovely purpose to connect to. Yeah.
Definitely. So how do you manage I'm curious, we talk about well-being and we talk about health and safety, but because you have such a big and such a diverse workforce, and I understand the corporate are the kind of like the central functions, and then you've got, I guess, business units that are delivering, and the people that we would contact or come in contact with as consumers. So how is well-being managed? Like, how do you support not only the health and safety, but the mental well-being and giving people the tools to be able to cope with change and, you know, chaos and all the things that we're experiencing?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I can't claim to be in the health and safety space at Australia Post, but we have fantastic health and safety team and injury management team, led by, you know, really state-of-the-art team. Actually, that they're very good, but the massive focus at the enterprise level around safety, and a big understanding by the board and the executive that safety is physical and emotional mental health, and they are, you know, both really important. And I think, again, COVID has really raised people's understanding and knowledge of the importance of mental health. So, you know, Australia Post has a very strong focus around psychological safety, and you know, building psychologically safe teams. There's a wonderful woman, Fiona, who leads up that wellbeing space, and she's been doing a lot of work back with the business over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, and connected into one of the universities. They have been running psychological safety, you know, surveys within teams, but doing a really grassroots program. So there's individuals from all the different divisions. So if I look at my part of the business, we've got the psych safety working groups in each of the teams, and they're working on behalf of their business and on behalf of the people there to try and make changes in the way that we're working that improve people's psychological safety. And you know, some of those things are big requirements, and some of those are quite small. But, you know, when you sort of think about what's really important to an individual in an organisation, like, you've got to feel safe. You've got to be able to feel safe to put your hand up and say, I need help. And how do you create a culture and environment where people can do that? You know, again, you've got to have, a big part of it is you've got to have leaders that create that environment in the local team level. You know, you've got to be able to kind of provide an environment where people really connect to a purpose and their values feel aligned to what the organisation is doing. And as you were saying before, you know, the leadership behaviours need to be reflective, not just words on a page, being a really important part. You know, I think, you know, some of the, of course, there's fantastic tools and resources in an organisation like Australia Post. You know, people are able to, we've got, you know, great online resources for people, fantastic webinars people can tap into. You know, there's online yoga, there's all of those lovely things that you can do. But the psychological safety is really the most important bit, I think, of all of that. You know, people really do need to be able to, you know, struggle safely. And if you don't have that in place, then people can't really thrive as well. So that piece about being able to bring your whole self to work, and everything about it, you know, good, bad, and ugly, is really important, you know. And of course, we've got a great team of experts that can support. You know, there are some times when people are struggling where the people leaders need help and the individuals need real help. So of course, you know, EAP programs are a given an absolute given now. And, people leaders being able to call an EAP and get people leader support to help them, support someone. But those elements around thrive, I think, are really important as well, so that piece about people need to feel that an organisation is fair and that it's recognising people fairly, that the performance targets are fair and achievable, and they, and you've got an environment that actually focuses on people's strengths and supports them to be the best they can be and creates great career paths for people. And, all of those elements are really, really important in any people and culture strategy, but from a psychological safety perspective, critical. Yeah,
completely critical. It's really interesting because it's all a balance. It's a balance between the performance of the business, performance of the individual, and the two are very, very linked. Psychological safety, if we could just look at that a little bit deeper, because completely agree, it's almost the crux of well-being. If you're because it also touches on inclusion, diversity, belonging. A lot of great research on the importance of belonging to feel well. An organization like Australia Post or NAP, which are so big, and there's going to be areas of the business that will get it really well. There'll be areas of the business that won't, and there's lots of factors that relate to that. Some business units are going to be more in demand or doing better, like the market will be in different areas. How do you track that? Like, how do you know whether, and it's also moving all the time, because culture can really kind of shift, but in the part of the business that you're responsible for example, how would you know, when you look at all of your different areas and you've got such a diverse group of people, how would you know where the people are feeling psychologically safe or psychologically unsafe? You're just one person, you've got your team around that, but how would you know? I'm really curious as to how would you pick that up to know whether there is a problem and action is required.
Action required. Well, absolutely. I mean, you've got to track it, don't you? So, we use, of course, engagement surveys, and then there are core elements that sit within the engagement survey, which you would hone in on, of course, around kind of indicators of psych safety. But we're also now doing psych safety surveys as well.
Okay.
And so, before I mentioned those working groups before that Fiona has set up within the organisation, they were set up with the data. So we did the psych safety survey, and that helped us understand, where things were going well within a particular part of the business, or where there were sort of some indicators of concern. And, that might have been, one of the questions around workload, the ability to switch off, that type of stuff. And in those teams are then using that data to try and drive the actions to improve. And we've got a follow-up survey coming up, again, a check-in coming up again in March. That's the first time I've seen the psych safety surveys used. And again, I think, you sort of think back to COVID has been a lovely trigger for organisations to be thinking about that. And then, of course, you've got other metrics, when people are resigning, making sure you're doing good exit interviews and understanding what are the factors that are driving that. I think the next 12 months will be really interesting. There's been a lot of discussion around the Great Resignation, and I think we're starting to see people making big life decisions off the back of not being able to make big life decisions for 2 years. A lot of people I know are moving house and moving jobs. It's an interesting time, and psych safety plays into that. I think. And there are things that organisations, of course, need to do. You need to manage and watch workloads. I think for some businesses, AP being one of them, it feels like our frontline teams have been going so hard, for so long, and that is absolutely being managed and watched. As we've headed into this Christmas period or this holiday period, actually really, really encouraging teams to take a break, have a digital detox, step out of it and forget about it, and then, that being led from the top, I think is so critical as well. And when I was back at NAB last year, we did that same focus, digital detox. And I think people stopped and then went, I didn't realize how tired I was, how do I replenish my reserves that might have been running at a fairly, fairly low stock, and do all those things that, from each individual we know builds your reserves, So for me, it's hanging out with family and friends and, spending time with people. For other people, it might be not spending any time. All of those things. My beautiful room here that I hang out in and day out, I'm quite looking forward not to spending any time in here. So, I think, but not to downplay it, I think it is a really critical part as well, and a lot of people haven't taken leave and they haven't done those things because they haven't been able to go anywhere.
It's so true. Yeah, I think people are very exhausted. It's because you realize the importance of holidays, the importance of breaks, but also the importance of changing the environment. Like you say, you may have a beautiful space, but it's good to have a different environment. A change is always beneficial around that. Digital detox is an interesting concept, and you hear it more and more, and I guess it's a reflection of the fact that a lot of our stress comes from the fact that we're always on. You kind of go back, and I remember when I first got a BlackBerry, which had been probably about 2005. I saw it as a great liberator because I no longer had to be in the office to check my emails, and it was great. But of course, with every benefit comes a downside.
Little did we know.
Exactly, because back then you'd go on holiday and it was a real holiday. No one would contact you unless there was a fire or something. Like you'd never be contacted. And whereas now we are always on, or we're always in touch, and we're working in global organizations, which is wonderful. We all benefit from it. But I do feel, and maybe detox is part of the solution, I do feel we almost haven't been prepared, we haven't been trained, and I'm really interested how you would encourage people to do something like a digital detox when I know that it's habitual, it's breaking habits, and it's very, very hard for everyone, young people, because we're so used to this, and this is how we connect. And I've got a 15-year-old son, and he gets withdrawal symptoms if we, so it's kind of, and I kind of say it in a light way, but many people are addicted to devices. Many people, when you see that within an organization, and that is a big well-being, that we feel we're fearful of missing out, or we're fearful if we leave our phone at home. It all kind of comes back, and this is kind of behavior. So how do you support people with that? Is it really just a kind of encouragement, or is it like no one must send emails? I've seen various different examples of different organizations try to tackle a problem which is a very deep and a big problem.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think the command and control piece doesn't work all that well for many people. But I think it has to be about giving people permission in the first instance, and I think that's the most critical thing that an organisation can do. So you've got to give people permission, and then you've got to make it a reality. So, I think, and I can speak for the team that I work in, with all the wonderful business partners who work across Australia Post, and we had a great session a couple of weeks ago, where as a team we sort of have been building out our team code and our guidelines for how we're working together in 2022, as we start to really, put in place hybrid working, which we've dabbled in a couple of times over the last couple of years, but haven't yet landed on. And that was an important part of that, so, giving. We've said to each other, we make a commitment that we won't be sending emails between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. We use delay, but that's also for some individuals working later in the day. and not working in the morning because they might be doing things with their kids or whatever, we respect that you might want to work in the evening, but please use delay send, you know. And it's a simple kind of piece, because you read the research, and if you've got your phone, you don't have it on silent, and you get the ping,
takes your brain.
you look at it. You look at it, and then your mind says, "Oh my God, that's really important. I better address it now," even though there's no one there to actually grab it when you've addressed it. It's sort of all of that piece. So I think it requires permission, and then you've got to put in place sort of some of the tools or the agreements to enable it. And so, I think I do like the fact that some organisations, though, turn their systems off. So you can't, and the only way you can contact someone is to send them a text and whatever, there's no, and I think different things work for different organisations. But I think, as leaders, then we have to role model that. So, it may have been easier for me to send that message, but that's not the right thing to do. I think the other bit to enable a digital detox, teams have got to back each other up. So if someone is away, someone else is on, and people know that if they've got that, they're not going to be walking back into, excuse the language, a shitstorm when they come back in. I think all of those little things are actually the things that enable people to switch off. My beautiful husband used to take my mobile, and when we were living in Asia and we'd go away somewhere on holidays, he would take my work mobile and put it in the safe in the hotel room, and he'd let me check it twice a week. Now that whatever works for everybody,
Yes. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's a habit. I went on a cruise whenever we were I've only been on one cruise, and that would have been 2019, and I remember that was the only time in a long time that, because you couldn't get it was so expensive to get a mobile signal, so I had 10 days with no phone, and it was amazing. I really felt rejuvenated and relaxed. So it definitely benefits you having that break, so you can see
Absolutely. And I think people actually learned a little bit in COVID as well about, the doom scrolling. So, in the similar way, you can kind of get into that path at work as well, where you're just kind of going from email to email to email to email at any time of the day. And people during COVID were kind of switched into the news and, pinged every 15 minutes about there's something new, there's a new update, but there really wasn't anything new. And I think a lot of people learnt to turn that off and stop doing it, because it actually wasn't good. It wasn't good for their well-being.
Still isn't exactly these
still is not good.
These daily updates. That's really interesting. As with everything, it's always about balance. It's always about learning to use these tools, learning to use the automated technology that you described, so that you can give your brain time to recover. I think a lot of things about recovery. Just on that word balance, because this whole podcast is called the Finding Equilibrium Show, so it's all about balance, with the acknowledgement that every day there's going to be things that come along that push you out of balance, but with the right tools, you can find your way back to equilibrium. Can I ask you, what does finding equilibrium mean to you, personally and also, professionally?
Yeah, for sure. Oh, it's such an interesting one, isn't it? So for me, it's kind of understanding the things that are really important to me, and and for everybody, but so the things that are really important to me are family, it's health, and it's work, and it's friendships, and so I've got a good sense of the things that I need, and so to enable that, I have to take ownership and responsibility for putting in place the things that enable that. So, for me, I do like a little bit of downtime away from everybody, and I go for my jog every morning, So if I don't do that, then I don't feel in balance for the day. So that's really critical. So that means that luckily in the job I'm doing at the moment, I don't have an international team. In the past, international adds a nice complexity to it. But I can get up early before the rest of the house, and I can get out and I can do my run, and I'm out in nature, and I'm, and then I step into my day and I feel in a much better space. It's also being able to, you know, fit in time to call friends and family and do those sorts of things. So, and I've got to do that or I don't feel in balance, you know. And so I think for me, that's what equilibrium is. It's, you know, it's about, I love working hard and I love going hard, you know, and delivering at work. If I don't have that as well, I also don't feel in balance. So to me, it's about the things that are most important and enabling those. And when I feel out of balance, it's because one thing's gone too far, you know. And I think the reality of working life for every one of us is that there's peaks and troughs and all of those sorts of things. And so you can't look at it as in a slice of a day. You've kind of got to look at it across a week and a month and you know, and do that. Yeah,
it's a pattern, and it comes back full circle to what you were saying at the beginning about self-awareness, because it's acknowledging that equilibrium is a temporary state, but being aware of when you're out of equilibrium, so you can take corrective action, as opposed to, and we see this a lot where, and this is why a lot of people are burning out, is because we're not listening to signs, and we're continuing until we're forced to stop, and then we're
absolutely. And you never want to get to that burnout stage, you know. And that's the funny thing, isn't it? It's always in the back of your head. You know when you're not in equilibrium, then do something about it, you know.
Absolutely.
And again, I think in COVID we were quite good at reminding people. You know, I used to have a little a tag stuck up on my window, which sort of had those things. You know, have I been outside today? Have I called somebody that I loved? You know, have I called someone who might need help?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, have I, you know, those various things that are really important. And
they're like tools, aren't they? You know, and if you're doing it each day, and it's the little things, but if like as you described, you know, moving your body, running is something I do a lot of, you know, talking to people who give you joy, you know, all of that helps you be centered, so that you can deal with, because in your role, it's like everyone's problem is your problem. You know, you're dealing with people and culture, so it's not like there's never going to be a day, I would imagine, where there aren't issues. You know, there's always going to be issues. So thank you, Kate, so much for sharing and for spending some time with us today. Where can people find out more about your work and follow you?
Sure, probably best to look me up on LinkedIn. So yes, and I'm not an avid poster, but sometimes I do share, particularly things from the Greater Good Science Centre, which I love. And so find me on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I'll put that link. It was a Greater Good Science Centre, do you say?
Greater Good Science Centre. It's fantastic. Great resource.
Well, just quickly on that, what kind of resources?
Lots about holistic wellbeing, actually. So it's the Berkeley Uni Greater Good Science Centre, and you know, fantastic researchers, and they run great programs people can tap into, and you can be part of their free research but learn a lot on the way.
amazing resource. I shall check that out. Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next time. Thanks so much. Enjoy your day.